"29 years, over 5,000 shows, the first show on AIDS, the first issue-oriented talk show, the first guy to go out into the audience with a microphone to know what was on your mind, had to say in our own state, Dayton, Ohio. He is an icon. It is not without question to say that every time we do a show on politics or issues, that if this man had not been around, I couldn't do it. And you have no idea what a thrill it is to be sitting right across from the man himself. He doesn't do these very often, so I am very thrilled to sit across from Phil Donahue. Whoever thought I would say that? Mr. Donahue.
Pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
Oh, my goodness.
I was afraid you wouldn't be able to read my handwriting.
Phil, I wanted to ask you right off the bat. I took this tip from you, just asking a real hard hitter right off the bat. For somebody who did a talk show for 29 years, why don't you do many shows as a guest?
Well, tell you the truth, I mean, I don't get that, I'm not that hot, you know. Yesterday's warmed over cereal. I'm considered a liberal, and liberals are scolds, you know. They're always complaining. Many liberals don't believe in God. Liberals don't support our troops. And it's not a very popular thing to be. Evidence Fox News and the Fox News channel and the success that they've enjoyed. I'm not out there begging for attention. So it's a difficult point to make without sounding a little bit self-indulgent here. Maybe I'm not invited to many places because I'm not that popular. But it's also true that liberals, you know, consider you've never seen Amy Goodman, for example, on Meet the Press. Dennis Kucinich has disappeared. Bill Moyers hangs on and has invited me, and I did his show. I substituted for him, so I'm very grateful for that. But it is just a fact that America is most popular among the conservative viewpoint. Conservatives are tough. They support it. They love America. They support the president. And, you know, we're arguing that in many ways we think we're more patriotic than they are. We believe in the First Amendment. We believe that the Senate and the House should confirm war making. We don't think it should be done by one president in an office. And that just doesn't fly today as much as the patriotic, conservative viewpoint. And that's the nature of our society at this time. I don't want to overstate this because there are a lot of heroic, in fact, we call ourselves progressive now. Conservative or liberal is the political idea that dare not speak its name. And progressives are just more popular today, are less popular than conservatives. So much so that we've changed our name. We don't use the L word anymore. We're no longer liberals, we're progressives. So excuse you for breathing, I'm progressive.
It's interesting though, Phil. You were on the air 29 years. You had an audience. You owned it for a long time. Does that mean the audience was more progressive and liberal then?
Well, that's a good question, and I can't say that it does mean that. The reason we finally took off, we started, as you know, in Dayton, Ohio, God bless Dayton, Ohio. Not on a navigable river, a town built on brains. NCR, the National Cash Register Company, the Wright brothers, Charles Kettering invented the starter motor, and others that I'm leaving out. And we had a largely female audience because it was a daytime show, and back in those days, Mom stayed home and Dad went off to a mysterious place in a high building to go to work and do important things. Mom went to the basement to do the wash. That's a little bit of an elitist example. Not everybody had a basement then. And we knew we were dull. We were visually dull. We were up against spinning wheels and come on down. And, Monty Hall was giving away $5,000 to a woman dressed like a chicken salad sandwich. And I'm here with one talking head, just as we are right now. We were visually dull. So we figured out that the only thing that would save us, and we weren't sure we were going to survive in Dayton, the only thing that would save us were issues about which our audience, largely female audience, cared. And so we started with Madeleine Murray O'Hara as our first guest.
The atheist.
Mm-hmm. I'm out of Notre Dame about, I guess, something like 10 years. And Madeleine leans forward, looks at me and says, "There is no God, there's no heaven, there's no hell." This is the first show. "There are no angels. When you die, you go in the ground, you biodegrade, and you become part of the physical universe." Well, the building fell in Dayton, Ohio. I'm still getting holy pictures. People are still praying for me. But everybody knew there was this new show on Channel 2 in Dayton, Ohio. And then, as the week went on, we put a gay guy on in 1967, a real live homosexual right here on my show. And I was, of course, scared to death because I thought, people are going to think I'm queer, and there goes my career. And, sure enough, the third caller said, "How's Phil look to you?" And a little old lady in downtown Dayton that afternoon said, "Well, who's your friend?" And I look back now at how really anxious I was then. We put another gay guy on, and that went through the roof. And another, and then we realized we were meeting a lot of nice people. And, I always had this label of being, I guess, progressive. Thank you very much. And I slowly came to realize that this was a civil rights issue. That why does it bother me about being with a gay person? What's going on here? And suddenly our program established a very good relationship or reputation within the politically active gay community. And in the 90s, actually the 80s, I got the first GLAAD Media Award. It was given at not far from where we're broadcasting, in Midtown at the Time Life Hospitality Room. There were probably 12 people there. I got my picture taken with the plaque, and I'm really very proud of it. 25 years after receiving that plaque, GLAAD called and said, "Would you come," it was just 20th, "would you come to the 20th anniversary of having received the first GLAAD award?" Sure. So I went to one of the largest ballrooms in the city of New York. And I walked in, and the red carpet with the paparazzi, there were more paparazzi there than there were people when I got my first award. And every table, not an empty chair, wall-to-wall tables. And the whole ballroom, around the ballroom, were logos of Fortune 500 companies. IBM, American Airlines, Mobil Oil, all around. And I couldn't get over the warp speed of this revolution. I just was, and I was very proud to be a small part of this effort. And along the way, met some fabulous people. And if there's one thing I'm proud of as a result of the history, and I get a lot of attention now, no sad songs for me. I mean, people come up to me in airports all the time, you know, Mr. Donahue, I'm Mr. Donahue now, so you want to keep that in mind, Scott. Mr. Donahue, thank you for your show. Because of your show, I got out of an abusive marriage. Thank you for your show, Mr. Donahue. Because of your show, I came out to my parents. And one of the comments I'm getting more and more often lately is, thank you, Mr. Donahue. Because of your show, I learned to speak English. Now, that's you know, I would wish this on anybody I love. It's just a wonderful feeling to realize that you've reached that many people and in many ways changed their lives. And I don't think that's an overstatement. It'd be better if somebody else told you this, but I am a lucky duck. I just feel very grateful.
Your show did do that, Mr. Donahue. I have no problem calling you Mr. Donahue at all.
Well, I am older now, you know.
When you were on the air, nobody did what you did. I'm not sure if they've done it since. I know the idea is that Oprah and Sally, and they all evolved from you. To a degree, going out in the audience, they did that. But nobody did exactly what you did. Because you also had, I think about it today with Trump, you had the people involved in Watergate on. But then the next day, you might have male strippers on. Do you call that variety? How do you define your show?
Well, first thing to know is that there were approximately 9 or 11 people outside my office door. Actually, there were like 30 when we got complicated and bureaucratic and had to deal with stations and sponsors and so on. But the 9 producers of the show were mostly female. The show began with a woman as a producer. Of course, the director was a man. And we also, you know, I also felt that I couldn't be a hypocrite. We hired our first black female very early on when the show started to make a little noise. And I hired her, this would be late 60s. I hired her because she had the largest afro. I mean, this is how superficial the liberals can be. I guess a lot of luck. First of all, we had a general manager who didn't drop his tools and run. We had a guest who said, all automobile dealers are crooks. That was the name of his book, I think. His name was Tony Till. I'll never forget this. Well, the entire Automobile Dealers Association of the Miami Valley, Southwest Ohio, canceled not only the Donahue show, but all their advertising on the entire station. So I had salesmen outside my office door, you know, who just lost their local car dealership. And it's hard to give a free speech lesson to a guy who's got 2.5 kids, and his income is now diminished because this guy Donahue. Well, we took the Automobile Dealers Association to lunch. We stroked him. We did everything we could, and we did finally get him back. But I look back on that now, and the real brave person was the general manager, because he had to answer to Cincinnati, which was, as we called it then, the flagship station of the Avco Broadcasting Company. And somehow we kept on keeping on. And then we got in more than Dayton. We got in 6 cities, and then 5, and then 9, and so on. And suddenly, well, it wasn't so sudden. The show began in '67, and in '74, we moved to Chicago. We originated from WGN, and it was easier to get guests in Chicago. I mean, important guests. And in 74 to 84, we were in Chicago. Wonderful experience. Chicago's an interesting place to be. Imagine how lucky I am. I've born in Cleveland, lived in Dayton, then lived in Chicago for 10 years, moved to New York, 30 Rock, and we went dark in '96. So that's a long time ago that we did our last show. We did over 5,000 shows, Scott. And if it sounds like I'm bragging, I am. This was a great run. And I don't know if I'm talking too much. It's because, I still have the ego. It's fun to talk about our own show.
It's very interesting, Mr. Donahue, because I wonder, in the age of Trump, and not to be political, we'll get to that later, do you ever think, boy, I wish I was doing my show today?
Absolutely, I do.
Yeah.
I certainly do. And Trump, by the way, was on the show. He was on the show 3 times.
What'd you make of him?
I thought he was a hot dog. He harvested celebrities. He really wanted celebrity as a part of his life. When I had him on, I talked about his book and his father, the builder of low-income housing for people. And I said to him, in fact, I was just looking at this the other day because there's been some demand for I think it was Michael Moore wanted to see it, some of the shows we did. And I said to him, I'm liking your father better than I like you. So, we got along okay, but I did push back even then, and I never got in his orbit, which he certainly wanted. He got a lot of celebrities at his home, in his plane, at Mar-a-Lago, on the golf course. He was very good at that, harvesting them and getting his picture taken with whoever was famous. And now here we are. My goodness. I mean, I see him sitting there with the Pope. Holy cow. I mean, I'm just totally fascinated by this.
In the world that we live in today, we talked about it a little bit before we went on the air, technology. And I understand the rub will be, I don't understand it, but the rub would be age. They'd say, well, we can't put Donahue on today. He's past it. He wouldn't get the demographic that we want. But you could do anything. I've seen your wife do an internet show. Why don't we see Donahue out? We need you at this time with those progressive values.
Well, as you know, I was fired by MSNBC because I supported I was against the invasion of Iraq. By the way, every major metropolitan newspaper in this country supported the invasion of Iraq by George Bush. That is something. I can't get over that. The land of free press, the framers wanted us to have a robust debate. And when a president calls a war, we're told to shut up and sing. At a time when we need this kind of cacophony of voices most, we're told to be quiet and support our president. It also reminded me of the problems with a corporate media ownership. I worked for MSNBC, which was owned by General Electric, which is one of the largest defense suppliers in the nation. I was criticizing Rumsfeld, who is General Electric's biggest customer. And that just didn't, this was when we were supposed to be supporting our troops. And it was such a revelation for me. I can't believe it took me so long to figure this out. I'm a slow learner. But there are millions and millions of very proud, church-going, pay their taxes, raise their kids Americans who believe in their heart that to criticize a president when he's calling for a war is unpatriotic. At a time when we should have a variety of voices out there, differing, the kabuki dance of different views. Maybe that would have saved us from invading Iraq. 5,000 to 6,000 Americans, Iraq, Afghanistan, dead. Young men and women who will never see a child get confirmed, no bar mitzvahs, no tailgate parties at football games. They're dead forever. And then I meet this kid in Walter Reed who's in Iraq, sees the president on TV, on the pile, calling with a megaphone that we're going to get the evildoers, signs up, goes to Iraq for 5 days. He's there 5 days. He gets shot in the back. He was a T4. Anatomists know where that is on the spine. He's paralyzed from the nipples down. He's a rag doll, confined to bed for more than 10 years. He had a pulmonary embolism, which made him lose his arm, and he lost his opposable thumb ability. He had to be fed. And he had a tube in his abdomen, which his wife, a wonderful woman who met him in the hospital, administered the nutrient that he needed to live. He finally died, and you may know I did a documentary about him. Another chapter of my life, a spiritual experience. I saw him in Walter Reed, and I thought people should see this. This is the most sanitized war of my lifetime. The president disallowed the media from taking pictures of the coffins with the flag. See the pain. If you're going to send young men and women to war, show the pain. What are we afraid of? We should know what these wars do. And then I thought more and more about it, and I'm sorry to preach here, but I just think so much of the human behavior conspires to war. You don't get a statue in a park for fixing health care. You only get a statue in the park for war. That's what all those horses and swords and children play on cannons in parks. You know, it's the way to be brave, and it's also the way to get killed early in your life, before you even had a chance to know who you were, raise a family. You know, and you say this, and people say, well, what are we going to do about, you know, the other guy? You want us all to get killed? I mean, the hysteria. Give peace a chance is not just a slogan. It should be something that people take to their hearts. Along the way, one of the many wonderful experiences that's happened to me as a result of my talk show, I did a space bridge with Americans in Seattle, which I chose the city Seattle, and Russians in Leningrad. It was then Leningrad. It's now St. Petersburg. I don't know, about 300 people on the satellite. This is 1985. Am I going too long here?
No, go right ahead.
And of course, people thought, you're a dupe. You know, here comes Donahue, the liberal, thinks he's going to. They will rig the audience. This is a KGB production, and you are a sucker for becoming part of it. And I said to my pal, who was then the host for The Other Side, Vladimir Posner, and I had never met him, and I'm on the phone with him, and I'm saying, can I say anything? And yeah. You're not going to bleep or edit out anything I say? No. So I thought, well, I mean, I'm going to trust him. So we go on the air in 1985. We taped it because of the time difference. Simultaneous translation. Everybody had an earphone. I mean, how we have not started a war just because of language problems, you know. Good evening, Lidich. And I'm scared to death because I'm gonna, you know, this was the first time that anybody had an opportunity to really say whatever they wanted. So I wanted to prove to all the naysayers that this was legit. And like, I'd say 10 minutes into the space bridge, as we called it, I said, standing in the middle of this crowd in Seattle, and looking at the big screen of the Russians, why do you allow old men behind closed doors make decisions for you? Why does it say Jew on your passports? Why can't you travel like any other free nation in the world? Why is Sakharov in Gorky unable to leave, in exile? And the people had never seen anything like this. I didn't realize it at the time. On their own television screens, the camera panned the audience, and these people looked like they were watching a plane crash. And I didn't know it then, but I was to learn later that everybody in the control room stopped breathing because they were a part of this, and this could be their livelihood, their jobs, their future. And I proved, you know, because I was really, really upset that people thought of this as some hokey thing that Donahue. So they showed it to Gorbachev after, remember, this hasn't aired yet. They showed it to Gorbachev. I was to learn later. Vladimir would tell me. And nobody could breathe in the room. And when it finished, Gorbachev said, "This will be our gift to the 21st Congress of the Communist Party." It was the first expression of glasnost, perestroika, as initiated by Gorbachev, who came to power in April of '85, and we taped in December of that same year. So this was his first openness expression. And so it aired. It aired. and a huge hit. Vladimir got 87,000 longhand letters, 1985, before the digital.com thing really hit. And then we went back with the Donahue show. And we did 5 shows, including Siberia. We got a lot of Heineken, put it on the plane. It was really an experience. I had my own interpreter. We're in Moscow, in a Moscow television station, surrounded by 300 Muscovites. And I said to them, if you could come to the United States, to United States, where would you like to come? Hands went up all over the room. And I couldn't get to them fast enough. One woman said, Disney World. A guy said Las Vegas. And I went to the back row. A woman was waving her hand. She said, Oxford, Mississippi. And I said, why? And in my ear, I heard the translator say, because that is the home of your great author, William Faulkner. And I wondered how many Americans knew that. And I was slowly beginning to realize that they're much more curious about us than we were about them. We spoke to in a college in Irkutsk, which takes 9 hours on an airplane to get to, and you're still in Russia, 11 time zones. And the students, is the Empire State Building still your tallest building? How many holidays do you have? Are you a believer? These are the questions that we're getting there. So, they had a celebration of this space bridge at the Finnish embassy in Washington. The interest in this was huge. In the States, we were able to get maybe 40 of our station, Donahue stations, to carry the show. In Russia, it was a smash hit that everybody was talking about. A lot of the complaints that Vladimir got in the mail, where did you find those Russians? You should have put me on. I would have asked that, they were upset at themselves. So, the day after 9/11, the entire front of the American embassy in Moscow was covered with flowers. So again, this is why progressives are not very popular. I think within the breast of Mother Russia beats a kind and gentle heart. Their problem is they can't get back the warriors who lead the nation. And in some ways, we might have the same problem. And if you can get the people to speak up, you give them the power to speak up. If you don't make them ashamed of speaking up and disagreeing, I think we can save more babies. And I just got lucky in being able to have this experience. My goodness, Irkutsk, a woman in Omsk, OMSK. I'm in the public square downtown, gray, rainy day, and a woman in a babushka looks at me and she says, fuel, space bridge. And I thought, wow, I'm hot.
There you go.
Yeah.
I do want to mention Body of War is the name of that documentary, and it's tremendous, and if you can see it, see it. The question there, Phil, where we started, and now I've got another one, so I'll just do a two-parter here. Would you ever come back and do anything on television or anywhere, internet world now?
Yeah, obviously, obviously it would, under what circumstances? do I have to fight to get on the air again? I mean, for issues? How much freedom would we have, so on and so forth.
Do you think the show you did on MSNBC in 2002 would float today? They're a much more liberal network now, progressive.
I'll say yes, they are. Yeah, it's amazing. When they fired me, they hired Michael Savage to replace me. I mean, Fox was riding high then. Nobody was beating Fox. So they wanted to outfox Fox. And they put on the shock jock, Michael Savage. And then suddenly they decided to go the other way, which was my way. So, I don't know. I obviously, I don't want to, I'm not hiding under a rock. But I think it's a little bit aggrandizing to suggest that anybody would want to have I'll be 82 in December. So, there's not a big market for these people either.
For the people listening on radio right now, I'm sitting a foot away. You would not guess that. That white hair has served you well, Phil.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And everything else. You're looking pretty good today.
Thank you, Scott.
The other question was, the question we all ask ourselves today, you know the Russians to some degree. You know Trump to some degree. Mm-hmm. That big word we talk about today is collusion. That's what's going to make or break this. Do you think it's more likely than not that there was collusion?
Yes, I do believe.
Why?
I think the evidence is piling up. You've got who had dinner with Putin at the big banquet dinner?
Flynn.
Flynn. That's just one piece of. Also, the Russians have a lot of money, and so I think Jared wants to do business there. Maybe already is, and they're doing what businessmen do. They're trying to make a profit. What is really horrible is that the collusion, which I can't prove, really does interfere with our democratic freedom of choice for our president and the people who will lead us. That is beyond the pale. So for them to work to defeat Hillary Clinton is beyond awful. And it certainly should move Americans to rise up. And if Trump knew about this, I think that is, if anything's an impeachable offense, that is to have a foreign power manipulate our election. Who in the world can support that?
Does this former First Lady, former Senator, state of New York, does she just say, oh, well, the FBI and the Russians blew my shot at being the first female president, and now I'll just be part of the resistance, and I'll give speeches, and I'm just going to go into that good night? Do you think she'll ever run for office again?
It's awfully hard for me to say. I voted for her. My wife voted for her. It would have been a pretty rough row for her to hoe had she been elected, which she should have been, as I don't have to tell you. 4 million votes is a lot of votes. But that thing I believe that media and a lot of us are really missed. First of all, millions and millions of people voted for Donald Trump. And these are largely nice people. They were angry, to be sure. They tolerated his boorish language, He dropped the F-bomb, didn't he, in some of his
Oh, yeah.
public places? You know, he's the thing that motivated them, in my opinion, was a real anger. This is hardly original analysis, but it deserves to be repeated, in my opinion. These were people, as we know, who made things with their hands, got home, had dirty clothes, took a shower, maybe had a beer and sat down in their big chair. The lucky ones that had a job. They don't know whether their company's going to move to Siberia or wherever, and they're frightened that it will be. They haven't had a raise in 7 years. And they look up and they see hedge fund people making $1 million on Thursday. And the gap between their income and the management or the Wall Street income is so enormous that it really threatens the society. The only person who really, I think, processed this was Bernie. Now, you can't say media ignored it, but big media didn't give it the heartfelt reporting that it should have. You know, if the general manager or the CEO is making, what is it, 100, 200 times more than you, and you haven't had a raise, you can't do this to you, and you can't do it to me. With 2.5 kids and doctors' pediatric bills, and you can't do it. It's unfair. It's on its face unfair. And these people finally, they looked up, and I mean, I'll put 3 fingers up because the one middle finger is vulgar. And that's what they did. This is like a revolution light. Without the shooting, without the bodies in the street, this was a revolution. They were tired of the elites, which get health care and all the things they don't get, and raise millions of dollars to get elected. The mayor of South Bend, his name is Peter Buttigieg, I believe it's pronounced. He's I think he's a rising star, an out of the closet gay successful public servant. South Bend is a bias for me because I went to Notre Dame, and South Bend is the contiguous city. When I went to Notre Dame in the 50s, South Bend had Studebaker. South Bend was the location of Studebaker Motors, made the cars there. Bendix Corporation and others. I'm sorry, I'm leaving out a lot. And today, you know, it's a shell of what it was when I was at school. And he is saying, his people are saying, as they watch television and they see what's happening and they see all the bar graphs and all the computer animation that's now being used by the news people and the shout shows, they're saying, what about me? What about me? They were there all the time, right under the nose of big media, and they were ignored.
Totally.
Ignored.
Yeah. Do want to let the audience know we're coming up on a news break in 3 minutes. Mr. Donahue has agreed to be our last guest today, so we have another hour here with Mr. Donahue. I'm not going to let him run away from me yet, but here are some things we're going to talk about in the next hour, and I'm going to throw this to Mr. Donahue too, because I want him to think about this during this news break. Do you remember a lady in Ohio named Dorothy Fulltime? We're going to talk a little bit about Mr. Donahue's occasions with Miss Fulltime. We're going to talk about the fast food icon who got censored on some stations on the Donahue Show. Wait till you find out why. This is an interesting story. And we're going to get one more question in here before we go, because here, Mr. Donahue, is where I think you changed television. and I'm going to get it here before we go to the break. When did you decide, because you were a newsman, CBS affiliate, when did you decide, I'm going to give my opinion? And you became this progressive.
Well, that came along with my suddenly looking up and realize I had my own television show. You may remember in the late 50s, the 50s is when two-way radio began. You could call the radio station, you got on, you could fight City Hall and so on. And the people in Dayton at WHIO television, where I worked, I did the news. I was the younger of a pair of anchors who did the 11, good evening, and, read the news. Okay, Donahue knows the mayor, and he knows, let's put him in here, and we'll do our own two-way called Conversation Piece. Monday through Friday, 1:30 in the afternoon, or maybe 1, I forget. And I knew I couldn't get people in Dayton to fly to Dayton to be on a radio show. So I took the phone company to lunch. I'm going to be brief here. And I asked them, can I have a guest long distance, and can I connect them to the people calling from Dayton, in Dayton, to the show? So they came out, and the next day I came in, and all across the table where I work, not like the one where we're broadcasting from, were wires and lights and 2 telephones. I would push 2 buttons at once on the phone and can say, hi, you're on the air, and I could connect you calling in Dayton to Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, Margarita Oswald, the mother of the assassin, Hugh Hefner, people, and they could call in and talk to these big shots, and of course the people at home listening, and of course the ratings went through the roof. So along the way I realized that you don't get wall-to-wall commentary in a show like this, so you had to pop off and say how you felt. Same with the TV show. That's when the general manager from the other station came over and said, why don't you do this on TV? And I said, well, what are we going to show when the caller's talking? And he said, don't worry about that. So I took my Rolodex from the radio show over to the TV station, and I replaced a show that they had hosted by a man who went to Hollywood to become, the man's name was Johnny Gilbert. Johnny Gilbert is the voice that said for years and years, this is Jeopardy, and very successful in California. And here I am. I inherited his audience. When he did the local show in Dayton, he had an audience. You could wave, a piano player play, and singers and so on. And so tickets were out, and I show up with Madeline Murray O'Hare. These people come in thinking they're going to be able to wave. And that was an accident. So in the duration of the hour that we were on the air, I felt that I had to at least keep the show moving by saying how I felt. And I had 150 women in the audience who could tell me I was full of baloney, and they could get up and say so. And so the best shows were the ones where a community developed between me, the guest, and the audience, and the phone caller. That was fabulous. And suddenly we realized we had something that nobody else had. And it wasn't because I was smart enough to know this. It just, we got the audience from the Johnny Gilbert show by accident. I got the phone company to, that started. So now we're able to, but I had to beg people to be on the show. I kept going. I couldn't get Ralph Nader. I wanted Ralph so bad. I thought he was right on all the issues. And I heard he was coming to Cincinnati, so I drove down for some other reason. And because I remember his secretary would say, Phil, who? And I drove to Cincinnati, and I figured he's going to come down through that door, and he's going to say, oh, my goodness, you came to, I'm going to introduce myself. He's going to say, oh, how can I turn you down? You came all the way to Cincinnati. I walked up, and I said, Ralph, I'm Phil Donahue. And he said, Oh, my goodness. He came all the way to Cincinnati. How can I turn you down? So I drove him from Cincinnati to Dayton in my 57 Chevy with no seat belts. I mean, I had nightmares for weeks. You know, I killed Ralph Nader because I had an accident on I-75 and there were no seat belts.
We're going to break for news, but we're coming back with Phil Donahue, Wellington Hotel, Midtown Manhattan. And we're going to ask Phil one of the questions that really ticks me off, and that is, why is there not a DVD of the best of the 29 years of the Donahue Show? Everybody else has a DVD. Why not Donahue? We'll be back with Phil Donahue from New York.